So yeah, we'll just get the recording going. So shall we start? I think we'll get going, will we? Yeah. So welcome. If you can just make sure you're on mute. If you've got any background noise going on there, it'd be good to just put yourselves onto mute if you can. My name is Johnny Quinn, I'm called, and I'm a presentologist. And this section is our 6th week of presentology on Mondays at about 4 p.m. New Zealand time, which is way down the time zone. But we've looked at virtual presenting and how to present virtually, and that's week number 1. If you want to review that video, I'll make sure you get all the links to the playlist of all the videos. We looked at green screens, what I'm doing now, setting your room up to look the way you want it to look, proper lighting, proper sound. Here I'm using the Yeti Blue microphone, so it's a nice big microphone that really gets my sound sounding well. We then went in and hopped around and started looking at slides, and we spent a couple of weeks looking at really sort of how we make slides look better, how we kind of change icons and add icons and infographics, and that's weeks 2 and 3. Week 4 and 5, we started looking at audience engagement. We looked at how we create audience engagement, and we had some real fun playing with Zoom and doing breakouts and trying different things with Zoom. And doing polls, which we're going to do one in a moment, so you'll see how that works. And last week we kind of looked at the common mistakes that people make, and what are the challenges that people have when they go to put their slides together. So we've been not working in a logical order here, but it's been audience driven, and that's been part of what we've been saying about the audience engagement side, is let the audience choose what they want to focus on, which is a good idea. We also then started into your story, how you tell good stories. And this week, that's really it's the second part of that, really looking at how we tell great stories, where great stories come from, and what's the structure of a good story. And we'll try to give you a formula for your passion, because if you're passionate about what you're presenting, then that's comes across in your presentation. So we'll try to give you that today as well. And I've got a choice for you today. We can either then jump in and look at some advanced and some of the latest features coming up in PowerPoint, which I think will fill up today's hour, or we can start working on our last section, which is public speaking, which is really pulling all this together, the slides, the video, the online delivery, and pulling it all together to actually present it, and the body language of things. So we'll be looking at that as we go through. So as I mentioned, please keep yourself on mute. If you want to, a quick tip there is to hold down the space bar if you want to talk, and while you hold down the space bar, talk, and then release it. And that's how you can switch off and on your mute in Zoom. If you've got any questions, type them up in the chat window and it'll flash up and tell me you've got a question. I would like to deal with the questions as we go through the presentation rather than, a big section at the end. But let's see how we go. So if you've got a question, feel free to either unmute your mic and talk or type it in. We're going to ask you some questions, so we'll show you how the polling works. And try to view me in side-by-side mode, which looks like this. So you should be seeing my slides on one side and me on the other side. You just click on that green bar, and you've got some options there, wherever it is on your device, and you will be able to see side-by-side mode, which is this. And there's a little gray handle in the middle that allows you to slide it left and right. If you've been here coming along, you'll know all about that, and that's a really nice way to use it. So let's just have a look at some questions of how you're all feeling today. So you should be seeing some polls there, and we'd love to get some responses from you. Are you full of life and raring to go as usual? A lot of people are. Or are you a bit tired today, suffering a little bit? But also the second question down there, what is your greatest presentation fear, which kind of links us into next week? And is it something technical going wrong, which is, an obvious issue? Is it failing? So we're going to look at that when we come on to presentation delivery, and understanding glossophobia, which is the fear of presenting, the fear of the situation, the fear of the audience, and the fear of the goal. The 3 different types of fears that presenters feel, and how we get ourselves kind of more confident when we present, and understanding the fear. So I can see that a few of you are voting there. If you can't see this poll, it's because you're using the web version of Zoom. You need to be using a downloaded version of it, or on your phone or on your device. But I'm just going to finish up with the polling there and show you the results. So it's really, most people are feeling full of life. That's good energy, bit of energy. And if somebody's a bit tired, that's understandable. But most people are pretty afraid of something technical going wrong, and that's technical glossophobia. Yeah, it is a common issue. What if things fail? What happens if For example, now my Zoom call finished. What happened if, I lost internet or something like that? And how would I deal with it? Well, my plan B is to go onto my mobile phone and use 4G in that event. But there are a lot of other fears that people have around the technology. Presenting and connecting up to a big display can be a problem. Interacting with the keyboard and the mouse. And I'm using Logitech Spotlight here, which is a really cool remote control. It gives me a lot of comfort in terms of controlling my computer. But certainly fear of the audience is something that a lot of people are afraid of as well. And we'll be looking at that, how we combat the fear of the audience next week when we come in and look at how we actually, get comfortable in front of people. A lot of you haven't chosen imposter syndrome, which in Toastmasters we call it FOBFO, the fear of being found out. And that is a common fear, is that it's the deep-seated fear, that one. It's, am I going to look stupid in front of people? That's really the best way to describe it. And really the main thing, we're going to touch on that a little bit today when we talk about passion and knowing your audience. So let's just stop that and hop in and crack on with what we're going to be covering as we go through. So here I'm using my all the different blocks that we've gone through and all the different areas that we've covered. So we've covered virtual presenting and looked at the problems, and we're down here in the story area. And that's the section that we're going to go through today. Now, there are quite a few sections in there. We looked at the rule of thirds, which is how we actually talking about three things. So try to talk about three things in your presentation, because it really helps people. People love hearing three things. And we'll look at that again as we move forward. We then went in and looked at keeping things simple and using picture superiority effect, which is not the Gangnam style sigh, but picture superiority sigh, it's called. So using an image instead of words. So it generally, a picture speaks 1,000 words, and we looked at ways of doing that. We also talked about using props and bringing props, and we have an interesting Toastmasters tomorrow night here in Queenstown, where we're really talking about using props and what's the basis of using props and when should we use them. And we talked a little bit about, different people using different props, like Steve Jobs, for example, would have, brought along a prop to actually really create impact. He most famously removed the Apple MacBook Air, a really thin computer, from an envelope to show how thin it was. That's using a prop to get your message across. We then went on and talked about how we make numbers more interesting, and we looked at how we are almost, when we're presenting, like an emotional drug dealer. We're trying to, and I don't know if you remember what the drug was, but it was serotonin and dopamine are the two drugs we're trying to release in people when we present to them. We're trying to get people to go, wow, and that's the wow factor. That's what we're after. So just to recover that, just to step in and have a look at those. So you can see that I've dropped down into my slides now, and that's using section zoom in PowerPoint. So these are the last slides we talked about yesterday that really people will, really hone in on the emotion that you create. If you think of the best presentation you ever saw and ask yourself, what was so great about it? Why was it so engaging? Well, generally you'll find that it had some sort of emotion in it. So I'm a bit of a TED junkie, so I love watching TED Talks. And the one that kind of really impacted on me was a really serious subject. It was a subject about an ambulance person, an ambulance man, who decided to stop lying to people when they asked him, am I going to die at road traffic accidents? So he literally passes on the knowledge from watching 25 people pass away in their last moments, because they're trained to not do that. They're obviously trained to tell people that you'll be fine. But actually he decided to change that. And it's not a famous TED Talk, but it really impacted on me, because emotionally I felt, wow, like, that's such an amazing thing to pass on the knowledge. And what was the knowledge? The knowledge was family. Those are the last things that people remembered. And it wasn't fear and horror that you might think. It was resignation and thank you and passing on messages to their other family members. But fundamentally, the message from those people is love your family, because they're the things that are really important in your last moments. So I really felt something when I watched that, and it really touched my soul. So what touches your soul? What really creates an impact on you? Because that's the best stories that you're ever going to hear. Those are the best presentations. And if you can bring some element of emotion into your presentation, be it that you're talking about to your family. I know in business you can't often do something like this, it wouldn't be appropriate, but you can connect with people by talking about their family or connecting about family or something common, which will create an emotional bridge with people when you're connecting with them. So this is the drug that generally gets released in people when you make that connection, and it fundamentally makes you more memorable. And better presenters move faster through organizations, faster through life. Being a better presenter is something that really can add impact on you. And I mean, like, when you think about it, kids, we don't really teach kids to present very well, but if we teach kids to present better, then they would be maybe possibly more successful adults. So that's something I'm passionate about, and it's something we can talk about that as we move forward. So passion is really, you know, one of the key things. And what makes your heart kind of grow? What really, and is there a formula that we could use? Well, here are some words around passion that spell passion. And they're just my words. You can choose your own, but you know, you want to have some element of higher reaching. You know, I'm aiming for a higher, something better, you know, so something's like this and I want to improve it. So I'm aiming for an altruistic kind of, you know, level when I'm presenting. That's really what I'm trying to do. The world needs better presenters, so let's try and help people. And that's what but the best ideas, remember we talked about it, are not always the smartest. Sometimes it wants to be smart, but make it simple. Don't be afraid to make things simple. And I think we do that quite often. We overcomplicate things. Keep it simple, because people love something simple. Try to have something that cuts through the norm and that's new and open. And those are all words that I would suggest you consider. And when you're up here, try to have, and I'm still working on this, try to have an element of presence. How can you be, you know, presence? How can you have presence? How can you have charisma? You know, is there a formula for charisma? I don't know. I mean, like, some people are more charismatic than others. You know those people. Maybe you think, you know, I would like to be like that person, but why don't you copy them? Why don't you look at the most charismatic people? And sometimes the most successful people in the world are not that charismatic. You know, just look at some of the captains or some of the main people of industry, and you can see that some of them really could do with some work, you know. So really being passionate about your subject is something that's fundamental. So you're essentially, when you present to people, trying to do one of these four things. And I wish there were three, as we talked about before, but there really are four. And which one of those four things are you trying to do when you speak to people? Because you're doing one of them or a combination of a couple of them. So try to hone in on that, because if your message is based around, you know, really kind of trying to get some information across to people and really get them to understand something and to change the way they currently are, then you're certainly doing and persuading and informing people, and maybe you're trying to inspire them and motivate them. So those are the sort of four elements in terms of getting a presentation together. Now, when you're working on your strategy for your presentation, it's really important you work out who they are. And we'll come on to look at that in a moment, because who your audience are is really important, and what's in it for them. But also, as a presenter, what's in it for you, you know, in terms of what you're going to get. Well, the more you work on presenting and the more you present, believe it or not, the more you become an expert in your subject. And the more you can be an expert, the more comfortable you will get with it. So please never get up in front of people if you're not sure about your subject. That's one of the worst fears. Fears of being found out, of not knowing your subject, is a really fundamental fear. So be very sure that you're comfortable, whatever you're talking about, otherwise you'll be found out really quickly. So knowing who the people are in front of you is really important. And I've put this this bit of information in so that you can take it away and have a think about how you find out who your audience are. We talked a little bit about this in color theory. You remember we talked about female and male colors. It's kind of a dodgy subject, because, you know, are there different colors that appeal to different genders, or are there different sort of looks or different sizes or different elements, different imagery that you should use? But essentially you should try to, you know, create a persona around your audience. Who are they? Are they mostly 65-year-old males? Is that who you're presenting to? Because that will help you. So try to segment your audience down. Now, it might be everybody, it might be everyone, and you can't do this, but it helps if you identify who is out there and what they want. It creates an emotional bridge with them. You've made a contact with them already, and you've already kind of had some information. You've already started a dialogue with them, and you've found out from them what they want to get out of it. And I did that with all of you as well. And here's an example of what I did with it, So this is a word cloud made up of all of the statements that you guys have filled in when you joined it up to this session. And I've removed a lot of common English words, and the smaller words, and there's a few there, but the larger words are the more frequent words. So essentially, this is our objective today. This is what we want to get out of these sessions. And what I did there is I polled all of you as you were filling up for this session when you registered. And I asked you a question: what do you want to get out of this session? And some of you wrote different things, and I've looked through them and I've had a look at them. But I took all of that text and put it into wordart.com, which is a free word art creator or a free word cloud generator. And you can actually create a cloud of the words, and the more frequent words are larger. So it very quickly identifies an objective that you guys are after: better skills and techniques to improve your presentation style. So that would probably be the generic statement. Now, believe it or not, you can actually create these things live. This is called, this is a word art, it's a website where you can build word clouds. But if you use something like, for example, there are some free tools online that allow the audience to use an app, and you can live have it appearing up on your screen. So polleverywhere.com, P-O-L-L, everywhere.com is free for 25 users, and you can have 25 people, up to 20. You have to pay after that, obviously, for more people, but they allow you to create word clouds free of charge, and it plugs straight into PowerPoint. So you can ask people, what do you want to get out of today? And immediately people's text can appear on the screen. So that's a great way to instantly work out what people want to get out of it. I'm just checking the chat as we go through. So if there's any questions, yes, of course, we'll be sharing the slides. James, later, we'll give you the link at the end. The slides come out every week, so we'll make sure you get them as we go through, of course. So yeah, word clouds, great way to connect with your audience and make them realize, actually, this guy's listened to what we want to say, and he knows what we want to focus on. So let me ask you a question. Did you know this? Did you know that tomato is a fruit? A lot of people aren't sure about that. A lot of people didn't know that tomato is a fruit. So if knowledge is knowing that tomato is a fruit, then wisdom is knowing not to put it into a fruit salad. Now, tomatoes in a fruit salad wouldn't be very tasty, would they? So what's the point here? The point here is that we have a lot of data in the world. There's a lot of knowledge. In fact, we've created more data in the past 5 years than we have in the past 5,000 years of all human history. So we're creating exabytes of data constantly. But what is the wisdom out of it? What is the real wisdom? Because we find a lot of people are trying to present and trying to get across a huge amount of knowledge. And your job as a presenter is essentially to change it, not to be all of the knowledge, but to be the wisdom, to be the real elements out of it. And, over my years of experience of kind of coaching people, it is, this has constantly come up. Let me tell you a story, for example. I was in Abu Dhabi one day. I was asked to go to Abu Dhabi, and I was asked to coach the board of AdGas. So probably one of the largest companies and one of the best companies, one of the really awesome company in Abu Dhabi. And they handle all of the oil and gas. And the board members are very senior people, and there are 27 of them. And I was asked to go in for 20 minutes and just talk to them about how really this concept that they don't need to, when they're present a lot of knowledge, but it would make a lot more sense to present just their wisdom, the stories behind it. And I tried to express this, and I stood up and did my presentation, my 20-minute section, but that wasn't the bit that I really want to tell you about. What I really want to tell you about is after it, normally there's a bit of hanging around afterwards. And one older gentleman came up to me and he asked me, he said, "So John," he said, "I don't need to read my slides to everybody." And I said, "No, people want to hear a story from you. Tell them a story of your history and in this company, and how the growth of it, and how great it's been." And honestly, the look on that man's face after I sort of expressed this to him and suggested it to him, it was like watching somebody be freed of a millstone. He really felt like under pressure, that he had all these 60 slides he had to deliver in 1 hour and go through all of these processes. I would love to get back in touch with him, because I don't know if he really affected the change, but they really, you know, were very keen to change and to go and tell stories. And people love it when you tell a story. And we're going to look at that as we go through the next little while. Fundamentally, I just told you a story about Abu Dhabi and about going to AdGas, and you will probably remember that more than you will remember some of the other things we talk about today, because it's a story, because there's a start, a middle, and an end to it. And, you know, the more storytelling you can bring into your presentations, the more effective they will be. So please dump the tomatoes out of your presentation. Get rid of the stuff that is kind of, you know, that really labors you and drags you backwards. So let me give you a test. Let's try something. Here's a paragraph of text. Now, what I want you to be able to do is to look at this paragraph of text. It's a company in the Middle East, and it was given to us as, typically this is what people will want to put up on a slide. But we don't want this up on a slide, because first and foremost, it's center justified, which is awful, very hard for the brain to read. It's also, you know, it's also got sentence case in it, so it's not that easy to read either. But we don't want all this text. So what I want you guys and girls to be able to learn to do is to be able to identify immediately what are the key elements. What would you break out, not in bullet points, but in terms of the key text elements that you would take out of this? Think of it in bullet points if you want to, but we're not going to use an actual bullet point, as we know. We're going to use icons. So when you look at that paragraph of text, what do you break out of it? Do you get state-of-the-art network? Yeah, that's good, isn't it? So that could come out. A catalyst for economic growth and sustained social development. That's also could be important. What about redefining logistics and transport in the region? Again, you could break that out of it. So the idea is to break down the sentence elements, because we don't think well when we read lots of sentences, to break out these different points. So modern, safe, efficient, and sustainable. And then hiding in there is possibly the whole company brief, the who we are, connecting the UAE. Yeah, connecting, you know, New Zealand, you know, connecting Australia. Those are the kind of core elements we want to break out of it. So when you see a paragraph of text, and look, people are much better at this than I am. Some copywriters will be laughing at me. That's fundamentally the sort of job they're able to do. They're able to look at a bunch of text and be able to break out. And that's really the skill that you need to work on, because by removing and leaving out the tomato elements and just taking out the really good elements, that's what we're trying to do. The stuff that isn't less important, it's still important, and it still needs to be presented and still should be in the handouts, but not on screen. When we go to put stuff on screen, we want just the core elements up there. Now, we can also use analogies from nature. And I don't know if you know this story, but if you watch a flock of geese flying above you, then there is a whole story around how they fly. You know, each goose is helping the other one along, and they don't fly in a V formation for no reason. The front goose has got the full weight of all of the wind resistance against it. So the other geese share and move around. Similarly, their wings on the inner edge are less affected by turbulence than on the outer edge, and they share that around as well. And if one goose falls out of the formation, the others will go to help it. So what do you think would be a good analogy around this? Where could I use this? Management. Yeah, if I'm talking about a management analysis, then the CEO at the front is supported by everyone else. And this imagery could tell a whole story, and you could build a whole presentation around management or structure by actually looking at an image such as this, and you could tell stories around it. And incidentally, having worked in the Middle East for many years, there is a similar analogy around camels, a string of camels in the desert. You know, the front camel has the hardest job because the sand is soft, and the ones behind it are actually walking along because the sand gets harder. And do they change around? And do they know the highest and lowest points through the dunes because they know to stay low? Can you follow them and find your way to water? Of course you can. So look, using all of those types of analogies are a great way of getting your story across, of using different messages to get it across. So again, I've got another story for you about storytelling. here is a picture that was on the wall in my kid's classroom when he was just about 5 or 6. He was just starting school. And I was sitting with Aaron's teacher one day, and she was telling me, you know, he'd been naughty at this, and he was, you know, he'd caused some trouble here, but he was good at these other things. So I was in for the parent teacher conference, and this was up on the board, and it was really annoying me. And I really kept looking at it, and it was a big picture as well. And I had to stop her. I said, "Excuse me, can I ask you a question?" I said, "What is that?" And she said, "Oh," she said, "that is called the literary story mountain. It's what we teach all kids these days." And she said, "You know, it starts off with an introduction, and then it goes to a problem with a rising action, and then a climax to the problem, and then a solution. And here's the language around it that you use when you're telling the story and the story mountain." And she said, "Why do you want to know?" And I said, "Because I wasn't taught it, and I've never heard of it before. And I know a whole load of business people who would really love to know about it, because I've never heard that there was a structure to a presentation, or a structure to." Most people just sit down at PowerPoint and start banging out slides, don't they? They just sort of loosely work on it. There's no real flow to it or story to it. I mean, if I started a presentation with "once upon a time," or "it all began in a dreary afternoon in Wellington," would that help you? Or would that be a good start or a bad ending? If I used language like "suddenly" and "just at that exact moment" in a presentation, would people engage? And I started to think, you know, there must be a structure to storytelling, and there must be a structure that we can pass on. So I took it and I started to look at it, and it's called Freytag's pyramid, is what it's called. And this is the adult or the adult version of it, or the business version of it. And again, kids would still use this today in terms of getting their messages together. And you can see that, you know, we've got a structure to the whole thing. And then we might start taking that and applying it to business presentations, and how could we move that on to another level, and what's it actually called? And this is the traditional arc to a presentation, and it's great for business meetings, and you know, but it also works for Finding Nemo, for example. So Finding Nemo, the Pixar dialogue is a constant story through all of, and a lot of Pixar stories have got this story through it. So there's a current situation, and a complication, or some sort of drama, then there's a question, what are we going to do? There's an answer and a resolution. And if you apply this to your presentation, in theory, there should be this magical formula. And I'm going to introduce you to a lady who studied tons of this and really found a hidden structure pretty much behind everything. Pretty much behind every great speech is a hidden structure that's sitting there. And this is it. It's what is versus what could be. And you should try to bring it into your storytelling when you actually are building your story. So the first part is really why the audience should care. You're setting the scene for them, and then you're offering them a reward at the end in terms of putting it together. So you're kind of flowing through it. Now, if we look at a typical example, for example, Jobs announcing the iPhone in 2007, it was arguably, you know, one of the benchmark sort of presentations that he worked incredibly hard on. You can then start tracking that and seeing it actually moving through, and you can start looking at different presentations and seeing that fitting into it. And we'll give you some examples of that as we come through it. But it all hinges around this, first of all. If you think about it, I don't know if you know who this is, but a quotation from Aristotle. And he really kind of focused in on that. And that's a great image if you're thinking about slides. And also making things simple by, who said this? Yeah, Einstein. Yeah. So what about the best on-screen content starts with a great script? Does anybody know who said that? Well, it was me just a moment ago. So the best content starts with a great script. So how do we write good scripts? Because none of the storytelling is going to work unless we really work on our script and have a clear start, middle, and end, and a storyboard, if we think about it, a story around our presentation. Now, these are our top 10 tips. I'm not going to take you through all of them, because you know that's the wrong way to do things, but number one is important. Yeah, please do not start at the first line when you're writing a script. Try to think about the last thing you're going to say, because the last thing you're going to say is the destination. for where you're heading in your presentation. So when we consider a 7-minute speech in Toastmasters, for example, or a 5-minute speech, the first thing I would consider is what is the last thing I'm going to get across, because that is the so therefore is really the ending and the anchor, and it's the last thing people are going to remember you for, and it's the last thing they're going to hear. So it's very important that your ending is good and punchy and also sets the destination for where your presentation is going to take them. Please, number 6, try to remember the rule of thirds. You know, have a clear starting to your presentation, have a clear middle, and then a very punchy end is important. If you want to practice it, get in the elevator. Does anybody remember the elevator pitch? The elevator pitch is a 60-second quick pitch if you're in an elevator one and getting your message across. So don't be afraid to practice, you know, quick delivery of your presentation, because number 10, you have to practice. And when, you know, if we're doing a really important pitch, then you may be practicing 20 times when over and over again. The more you practice, the easier it gets. Number 7, ask yourself, why does it matter to the audience? And I think the rest of them are pretty self-explanatory in terms of laying things out, but we'll make sure you get these slides as we go through. So if we take a look at a typical message map and how we lay things out, this is about as simple as I can make it for you. You start off with what's your core point, then you've got 3 separate points, which is the rule of thirds we talked about, and you've got 3 supporting points under each one of those, and then to your conclusion. Yeah, so that's really what you want to get across. In terms of mapping out a message, then that's the simplest way you can make it. So for example, if we look at Steve Jobs' Stanford speech, his title was that, yeah? And then he had 3 separate sections with a second section under each one. And, you know, section number 3, item 1, you know, he was dealing with a very tough issue as he knew, you know, his fate was coming towards him. And he really kind of broke it down and brought the people to that conclusion as he moved through it. But this is probably just as simple as you can make a message map in terms of messaging out what you've got to say and how you've got to say it. Now, I know that you've got 100 slides and that there's no way here you can get into 9 slides what you need to get across. But remember, we talked about the fact that people's time is getting less and less. And there's no reason why you can't have 9 or 10 or 12 slides at the start of your presentation and then go into an interactive section where you ask people what they want to talk about. So using that interactive and creating contextual based presentations, this part I'm really referring to for the start, for the real impact, for the part that people are going to remember you. So breaking it out into a storyboard, and I've got my good friend Diana Thompson to help me with this. She came up with a presentation storyboard, and a quick shout out to her. She's got a book called The Naked Speaker, and she's just rebranding it, but you can also, you can look it up, and it's called The Naked Speaker, and she's got some great ideas like that. She's a Kiwi author, and she's got some great ideas, and this is one of them, which is a storyboard of how to lay things out, and a quite a dense storyboard, so it's got some real points in there, but you see the same concept. You see, we start off with why we're going to do it, you know, who we're recognizing the audience, then breaking it down into the key different points, and then a summary, recommendation, and a conclusion. Let's have a look at it populated. So I've populated one for you just to kind of give you some points to move through and some questions to ask. So when you get these slides, please, if you're thinking and you're stepping back of how do I reinvent myself? How do I start my business again? How do I create a new kind of overview? Go to something like this, because it will help you storyboard out what you're trying to do and how you're putting things together. And in terms of, you know, if you've got a big training deck and you've got, you know, sort of 400 slides that you normally deliver over a week, then this is your kind of overview of the whole thing. This is the storyboard. Sure, you can have 150 slides in the middle that you have to go through, but try to wrap it around with a storyboard such as this, because it will fundamentally help you. I've also given you some script writing techniques here, which you can use. So, you know, here's some ways that you can consider creating a great introduction in trying to connect with people. So you saw at the start of my presentation, I've got 6 different areas, and I'm identifying where we are now and where we're going. So that's orientating us because we're going through this. So essentially over these sort of 12 weeks, I'm pretty much delivering, you know, my full 450 slides of my course. And it's a case of, you know, sort of giving that information away, but you've got to add information to it and help people as you move through it. And you've got to tell people what they're going to learn each week and ultimately why they should invest their time. You know, you've got to invest and get people invested into your presentation. And then the core, you know, the funny thing about the middle section is that the body of it, it's actually less important. The intro is really important. Defines you. Am I going to listen to this person? Why should I listen? What are the information they're going to give me? Then there has to be meat on the bones, the middle of it. But the conclusion is really important. What should they do next? How could they conclude with a story? You know, tell a story that's going to maybe bring it back to the start again and give them a clear call to action, something they can go and do next. Because people just don't want to be left. They want to say, how do I find out more? I'm excited about this. I'm pumped up about it. How do I get? And you won't believe how many presentations we see without contact details at the end. How are people going to get hold of you at the end? You know, at least maybe if you can't use a QR code, at least have your phone number or your website on there so people can remember you. And if you're standing up delivering something, you're creating that impact. And that's really important. So in summary, and we talked about summarizing and summarizing more often, these are just some of the tips we've talked through and some of the areas we've looked at. The fourth one there is, you know, trying less is more. So trying to remove information. So if I look at most people's presentations when they send them through to me, my immediate reaction would be delete half of it. Now that's tough, I know, because, you know, half of it's really important. But you can also make it contextual. You can also make it interactive and not necessarily go through all of it. Remember, try to stop thinking about moving through linearly through presentations. Try to make them interactive. Now, writing your script and memorizing it is one of the most complicated things, especially if you're delivering a speech. And we use different techniques to do that. And we cover that, we'll touch on that a little bit when we come on to delivery. But try to use an arc in terms of getting it across. And, you know, we talked about the rule of thirds. If you can bring 3 into your presentation, people love it. But try not to leave it to the last minute, you know. Procrastination has killed so many presentations, you know, so many great presenters out there. It's killed so many great books. It's killed so many musicians. I don't know, there's a classic HSBC advert called The Museum of Procrastination. I would urge you to have a look at it, where they're welcoming everyone into all the novels that haven't been written, but try not to leave it to the last minute. I believe sometimes that as humans, we deliberately leave things to the last minute and then apologize that I didn't really do it. So try to make the time. You know that you're going to get on that plane sometime in the future, hopefully when things return to normally, and go on holiday. So make sure that you've booked your flight. It's the same with a presentation. You know you're going to be standing up in front of those people at that conference or on Zoom in 2 weeks' time. So start working now on it. Why don't you work it now? Bake it early, get it ready, and practice it. Don't leave things to the last minute, because nothing good was ever done at the last minute. Try to improve it as you go forward. So another book that I can recommend in some other areas is the Talk Like TED series of books, which are absolutely brilliant. This one in particular by Carmen Gallo is brilliant. If you're a TED lover, then Talk Like TED is a great look at all of the different types of the TED Talks and what was the best parts out of them. Also, Nancy Duarte is a lady I mentioned earlier, and she's written a whole series of different books. We looked at one in the last section, and this one's called Data Story. Now, Data Story is a great book in terms of getting data across to people and how to communicate it. But feel free to scan this QR code, which is our LinkedIn group, or my LinkedIn group. Just follow me on LinkedIn, because we're constantly posting new ideas and new information around that in terms of how you get connected to people. So that's storytelling, and I hope I kind of covered a couple of different things there. Any questions along the way, feel free to throw them into the chat. But I was really wondering what you guys would want to cover next. I've got a couple of different ideas for you, so I'm just going to ask you what you would like to cover next. I got a couple of different directions I can go in. And would you like to look at the latest features in PowerPoint, or would you like to start kind of delving into presentation delivery? So what am I doing here? I'm showing you an example of what I suggested to you earlier. Ask people what they want to talk about. In Zoom, you can do this. Just allow people to poll, allow people to tell you what they want to focus in on. So I'm just looking at the results coming in, and it would seem that we're going to do delivery next week. And yep, it looks like that. Let me just check. I've got a couple of chat coming in here. I will, of course, share the slides at the end. Remind me to share the slides with you, Josephine. We'll make sure you get them, of course. And Hugh, I think you're after that website later, which I will. I think you were talking about WordArt. It's WORDART.com. WordArt.com is the WordArt one I was referring to. I've just posted it there, but also I'll make sure where all the slides are. So look, 53% of you, let me end that polling and share the results with you. So 53% is pretty narrow, but I think we're going to go with the majority vote there. So we'd like to focus in on the latest features in PowerPoint. So we're going to spend a little while now just looking at, these are some of the most awesome features that you're going to find that are coming, and they're coming to a PowerPoint near you. Now, we have to talk a little bit about different versions of PowerPoint, which we'll focus in on as we go through, but there are different elements to where we can go. So let me just move around with my Logitech Spotlight. So now you guys have told me you don't want to do, for example, I could have gone down to the public speaking section here, which would have dropped in, but we're going to go back into the amazing slides section. And then down here, we covered all of this stuff before, the basics, and you can watch all of this on the videos that we've done, which we'll send you through the link to it. And we get down to amazing animations. One of the things we didn't cover was timelines, and I'd like to just touch on that, and then that links nicely into the latest features of PowerPoint. So I'm just going to show you a couple of examples of timelines as we move through as well. So the timelines are a very nice way to get your message across, and these are using the more advanced features in PowerPoint. So this slide goes way back to 2003, believe it or not, and I remember being asked to do this slide. It was really tough. The company came to us and said, we want to animate a slide with lots of different content on it, and we want it all on one slide, and it all has to be done in PowerPoint. And we were like, oh, wow, it's not possible, is it? And then we started looking at it and we said, you know, maybe it is possible. And we started to have a play with it, and we started to mess around with it. And we very quickly realized that actually we could create a slide with lots and lots of content on it that's moving around. And it was kind of the start of a sort of aha, realizing that PowerPoint could be used in a way that people aren't used to. So for example, if I show you the slide, this is the back end of it, and here's the animation pane, and hopefully you can all see that. Over here on the right hand side, we have a whole range of different animations which we're doing, and we have a whole load of different text on it, and we've got all these different elements and objects which are based outside here, outside in the, remember we've got this kind of the canvas area, and over on the far right hand side you can have a whole load of different content waiting to move onto the slide, and we're pushing it across the slide. So when we actually animate it, it all moves across. Now when I save this slide on its own, it can be just, you know, in the order of sort of less than a megabyte, and it's a huge amount of information, a whole timeline to get across in less than 1 megabyte. So PowerPoint's a brilliant way of communicating to people and sending out different information. So switch on to the fact that you can do that. Now, a quick example of a lovely bit of work which we're proud of last year, which we did for Rothbury. And when you put it together with some music and some elements, then you end up with a storyline. Here's a storyline, and hopefully you're hearing some sound, which is just some bit of background music. So you can see we've got a little storyline made in PowerPoint here, just to set the scene and tell a timeline story. And these are the slides which are now moving across. You'll see the slide's going to move across the page as we move along to the next story. So we're telling the history of the company, but by using a timeline. What do you think? Do you like it? You can save this as a video. And Josephine like that. Shall we have a look at it and see how we did it? Well, essentially it's just you know, a series of slides, yeah, with objects on it. So here we've got the first slide, which has got some animations on it. Now the first animation is telling the audio to play. So there's the audio file playing. I'll just keep the chat on so I can see what you guys are saying. Good, you like it? Good. So any questions, just keep them coming. So that's the audio file playing to start off with. Then we've got the different elements which are being animated onto the slide. Then this next slide, let's just notice that each one of these slides have got a different transition to them. So we're fading or pushing the slide. Here, see here, we're pushing the next slide and we're pushing it from the right-hand side. So if you think about it, as we remember, a transition is a movement from one slide to another slide. So these slides are being pushed across from the right-hand side. And because we've got that constant line down the bottom, this line at the bottom, it looks like, you know, that it's one line and that we're simply moving it across. Now we've cut out each of our presenters and each of our key people, and we've got all of these different objects. Even the clouds are little individual objects. We can move those around, and then, you know, we stitch it all together by playing the music. The music plays across the different slides. So like, for example, if we move these clouds around over here and then pick this up and maybe move this over to move things around, and notice that everything is PowerPoint text, so we could edit and change it. And if we have a quick change at moving something around just to see what it's going to look like, then the slide still moves and changes, and everything is an object on the slide and everything moves into a different position. So stop thinking of PowerPoint as just a single slide with a single picture on it. Everything is an object, yeah? It's just a case of moving stuff together. Just checking in on Com and Joe on a few questions. What is the recommended time spent on each year to capture readers' attention? Well, Com, we are probably up at sort of 5 seconds per slide before things move forward. Remember that you can adjust that infinitely. You can have it much longer, or you can take time, and it depends how much information you've got on each slide. And remember, this portion of slides can be saved out as a video, so you can actually create a 1080p video from this to go on YouTube, or whatever you want to do with it. So you can use PowerPoint as a way. It's just exactly, Josephine. It's just manipulating the timing and moving things around. So it's just a case of moving it. So for example, here we talked a little bit before about the motion path. So these two circles are going to move in towards the center because Rothbury and Commercial General join together. Now, when these two circles move together, they're then going to disappear, and this big circle is going to appear. So when you see this animation come in, it moves across, the two circles move in, they disappear, and the other one appears on top of it and zooms in from the top. So it's again using just straightforward animations, but moving things in a slightly different way. Here we've got a map. Simple maps are always great. So we've got the map and we've got the pins dropping down onto it. Now you notice at the bottom of those pins, when they drop onto the map, if we drop down into the animation effects, we're doing something very simple at the end there. Under effect options, we've got the option to do a little bounce, which is a bounce that makes things bounce. So if I make that one really bounce, you'll see that they kind of jump up and down. So when they land on the page, they're having a kind of bounce animation. So let's have a look at that one again. I've got one with a really big bounce on it. So it did a little bit. So just by adjusting those types of things is the way you can do it. One more timeline example to get you excited. This is a simpler one with a snake line on it, followed by, again, another slide. Here I go. I'm going to click the next slide, pushing up, and then the next year appears in. So you've got a timeline which you can keep adding and duplicating new slides. I just Control D to duplicate a new slide. And then I could, for example, just add in my next years, go in and add my next years in, and then change my pictures. And I've made very quickly a brand new slide. I can even, because the animations, one of the things we teach people to do is to change the picture from a file. So we don't necessarily change the actual pictures, because if we delete the picture, then we lose the animation. But by changing the pictures stay within the slide and the animations follow. So if you'll notice, we're going to click the next one, and these are the two we just made. So just very simple way of duplicating and adding in new elements by adding in and changing elements on the slide rather than trying to reinvent the wheel. Cool. So that's that. Now, some of the new features, these are the features I'm about to show you. Some of you may have seen them before, but others you may not have seen. And we've got 10 minutes to go, and I'm really just keen to bring you up to speed on this. So 3D is new, is coming to you, to a PowerPoint near you. So the heart is actually a three-dimensional shape, and I can create and move and manipulate it and do stuff with it. So for real estate, for fly-throughs, for all sorts of different elements, it's a great way. For medical, obviously, but anything where you're trying to get some interesting information. So I was doing some work with F&P, Fisher and Paykel here in New Zealand, a great company, and they were, we were looking at the possibilities, and here we were able to move around and look at a stovetop, for example. So how do we do that? Well, the stove is a 3D object, and I can actually spin, pivot, move it around, look at, let's say we want to look at the back of it, and then we want to zoom through and look at the front of it. Now, we can use the great feature in PowerPoint called a transition called morph, where I move from one to another. When I change and have the same element on a separate slide, morph will work out the movement between the two elements. So here I'm at the back and here I'm at the front, but you can see here that the transition over to this slide is called morph. So what happens is, and that's available if you've got Office 365, here's the first slide where we're looking at the back of the unit, and then when I go to this next slide, it automatically knows that it wants me to look at the front of it, so it works out the movement from one to the other. Now imagine what you can do with this. There's so many things. I've seen people take people on a journey through a tree, for example, or through a plant when you're talking about sustainability. Just try not to think literally about it. Try to think of some of the objects that you have and try to use them in terms of creation. Some of the latest features as well is Quick Starter. Quick Starter is a research assistant in PowerPoint. So for example, if I go to File and a new presentation, you will notice that you have the option for Quick Starter. Now, if you don't have it, it's because you don't have Office 365. So I'm using Office 365 and I'm an early starter release. I'm starting to see some of the latest things coming through. So Quick Starter is essentially, and you need an internet connection for this to work, but essentially Quick Starter builds presentations for you. So for example, if we were trying to find a presentation about Abu Dhabi, for example, we would type in the word and it will go away onto the web and research Abu Dhabi. So it's got chosen Abu Dhabi for me, and it's going to pick some slides for me. So it's going to break it up. So it's essentially a research system looking at how you build up your presentation. So it's got all of these elements, and I can choose to drop them out or not. And then it goes away, and it asks me, what look do you want for your slides? And then it will build the presentation for me. So I like this one, and I can create it. I don't recommend you actually use some of those, that you need to edit the content later, but it goes away now, and with a decent data connection, because it's going and pulling a lot of information together, it builds a presentation for me. And I probably, because I've started another presentation, it's showing me what it's done. So it's showing me now slides about Abu Dhabi, and it takes me through it. It's essentially just an overview of the whole thing. So, so it's a simple way to do that. I'm just going to close this presentation, and we're back. Hopefully you can see, you're back still seeing my Quick Starter. So Quick Starter is a really neat option. Designer, I'm not sure if anyone of you have played with Designer, but if I say insert and I put in a new slide, Designer is essentially a designer in PowerPoint to help you create, the layout of slides. But if I just put in a new slide, just put in a blank slide here, and if I insert an object on the slide, such as a shape or a picture, so if I go and get a picture and put it onto the slide, let's use these nice people, family shot, then with Designer turned on, what will happen on the far right hand side is you will start to get some design ideas. Now you need to be doing it with a new slide, but it will essentially try to lay out your presentation for you. And because I'm sharing one right now, it's not gonna play ball with this, but have a look at it, insert and Designer. Morph is a way of moving your slides around, and we just looked at it where I was moving the oven from one place to another, and it's a transition. Zoom is what I'm using for the overview of my presentation, and it's a way of kind of allowing me to move through my presentation into the different elements. So you saw those blocks that I was using at the start and jumping around in my presentation. So Zoom is a way of doing that. So here are all of the slides in my presentation, and I can zoom right down and see them all. And you see at the first slide has got all the blocks, and it shows the first slide of every one of these sections. So the way that you then end up with this at the top is you put in a Zoom summary, which allows you to see all of the different areas. To section your presentation up into the different sections, you simply right-click in the white area here in the slide sorter, and you say new section, or add a section. So I can create a section, and I can add slides into it, and then it will jump to that first slide. So that's just a very quick way of creating an interactive presentation. You can then collapse all of the sections and move through them, or you can print different sections. So it's a very simple way of getting to your slides. If you need any further help with that, just give me a shout. Just keep in touch. Now, leaving the best to last, what else have we got? We got live presentations coming very soon. So PowerPoint will allow you to present online live to your audience. So you can actually now stream your PowerPoint. Now, what's the difference between that and Zoom, which I'm sharing, where I'm sharing my slides? There's a subtle difference to that, in the sense that the audience can, on their devices, look backwards through your slides. They can control your presentation, not forwards, but they can also score you, and they can also give you feedback, and they can also connect with you, and they can also listen in their own language. Now, I'm not sure if you're aware of that. Let's have a quick demo of that, because that's definitely so. Live captions and translation. Can PowerPoint do that? Well, surprisingly, it can. It's under slideshow, and it's called subtitles, captions and subtitles. So if we choose, for example, let's choose Arabic today, or let's choose Arabic. So I'm going to speak in English, and it's going to translate into Arabic for me. And I'm going to put the subtitles, I can either have them overlaid on top, or I can actually have them appearing on top, and I can move the slide or below the slide. And I think we'll put them below the slide. So if I now go to this slide and switch on the subtitles, you should see that when I start speaking down at the bottom, you should start seeing that PowerPoint is now listening to me, and from the right to left, it's now live translating into Arabic. And so I don't know how well it's working. When I have tried it with audience members, they've said to me that it's working at about 80%. About 80% of the information that I'm communicating, they're getting really well. So tell me in the chat if you think it's working very well. I'm keen to know if you think it's working well. If you want to try another language, for example, let's try, let me try Hindi, and I'll just try and move them. I'll move them to bottom overlaid on top of the slide. So I've now changed over to speaking in Hindi, and in the bottom right-hand corner, my slides are now listening to me, and I have to speak quite clearly. And people have told me that, you know, it's about 80% correct. And if you're presenting to an audience who are coming from another part of the world, this is a great way to live translate using the internet and Google Translate onto your slides, so people can really get connected with what you're saying. So I hope you like that as well. That's called live slides and live translation. So look, we've looked at quite a few different techniques there today, and different things in terms of getting connected and in terms of connecting with your audience. Let me just give you the link, and will I turn those? No, I better turn them off. They'll just frustrate, get in the way while we're moving forward. So let's just look at any questions that you had, but also just want to focus you in on where you can get the slides from and where you can find out more. Don't be afraid to try something different. We've talked about this before. Disrupt, change. If you switch on live slide translation to a Chinese audience, if you're over there talking to them, they're going to love you for it. So don't be afraid to ban the bullet point. Work more on your content. Work on how you deliver it. We're going to look at that next week. Work on that interactivity. So remember, in my last 16 seconds, you don't get a newspaper, you get news. You don't really get glasses. If you think about it, you get vision. You don't really get a mattress, you get sleep. And you don't really get a lamp, you get light. Well, if you're using Presentology, you're not getting a presentation, you're getting applause. Thank you very much. So where do we get our slides from? We're going to cover next week audience engagement, and we've covered that. We're going to cover week 5 public speaking, and I'm really just keen to understand that that's what you want to cover. So we're going to focus in on that. This is where you get the slides from aalive.mobi. You can either scan that QR code or you can go to aalive.mobi. There's a flashing cursor there, which you can give us some feedback on, but you can download the content directly in the slide section there. You'll find that there's a whole range of content that will help you. The assets are awesome. I just used one this week. I needed like a line around something. So there's some awesome assets in there. And here's my QR code if you want to connect with me. Just grab my details or keep in touch. So a few chats there, a few questions. Thank you, David Nottage. Great to see you along. And Peter, thank you for coming along. Awesome to have you along. And I'm glad you all got the tips. I think I've covered most of the questions, but please keep in touch, and I'm around if anybody wants to ask any questions or stay for a chat. I'm going to switch off my slide share in a moment. If you've got any specific questions, then hang around and have a chat. But other than that, thank you for investing the time, and I will see you next week for presentation delivery, which is just really looking at fear and how we deliver our presentations a little bit better. If you really want a course, you need to come along and see David Nottage and spend some proper time on it. So thank you to everyone for coming along. See you soon. Hey everyone, I'm hanging after. This is the after party. So you all okay? Switch on your mic. Hey, Mr. Nottage, how you doing? Good to see you. Hey Sue, how you doing?
Good, thanks. I couldn't get my sound working at the start.
Oh yeah, was it good? Yeah.
I was hearing you lip read.
Oh, you were not, were you? Well, you'll have to watch the video. And
it was only the very start.